Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara.
Buckle your seatbelt. We've got an episode full of information and alliteration, our favorite. Um, we spoke with Melinda Wenner Moyer a couple of years ago when her first book came out, How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes. Excellent title.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew we would have her back because she is just so relevant and salient to everything we talk about. But I didn't know in what form. And it comes in the form of this conversation about her new book, Hello, Cruel World, which is, it's really sort of a testament to the moment that we're living in, but also there's a through line of timeless information in here. I mean, it's like this great marriage of two sets of ideas. And frankly, she's just fun to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, Melinda's so thoughtful. She's this wonderful combination of deeply thoughtful and just a ferocious researcher and journalist. And at a time when it feels hard to know if you're getting good information, reliable information, study-backed information, you can count on Melinda. She's a contributing editor at Scientific American magazine. She's a regular contributor to the New York Times. She has this awesome Substack called Now What? And you just know that she's not blowing smoke up your ass, for lack of a better. Everything she says, everything she talks about, everything she recommends is steeped in layers and layers and layers of research. And she attributes it, which is also wonderful at a time when journalistic standards are in a questionable moment as well.
She cites her sources. She quotes people. She actually doesn't say the things that are her ideas and aren't her ideas, which is one of the reasons she's reliable, right? And it's one of the reasons. So we love her work, but we also love being in conversation about her work, about her process. And I think people will find this conversation not just actionable, because she gives a lot of tips about how to parent or raise for trusted adults, how to help raise kids in current circumstances. She gives very tangible advice, but she also, I mean, it's just sort of incredible to hear her own path through it. And you just feel not so alone, right? You and I are in our little bubble where we talk on this podcast all the time. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like, are we just sort of existing over here in the Cara Vanessa sphere? And Melinda's here to say, no, this is what the data shows. It really feels like this for most people. So let's be in community about it. Let's be in conversation. This is a life skill we all need in order to not raise assholes. I mean, there we go. Full circle.
And to be able to with other assholes, which is the other part of the equation.
So enjoy.
Enjoy. Melinda, welcome back to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be back. Thank you.
For those of you who were not lucky enough to hear Melinda on her first episode on the podcast, which, is just like probably the best named book ever, How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes, is now followed up by an equally wonderful book entitled Hello, Cruel World, Science-Based Strategies for Raising Terrific Kids in Terrifying Times. And Melinda, I don't know if you know this about us, but we are like probably the most loyal alliteration fans in the history of the world. Cara and I, there's not an alliteration we don't love. There's not an alliteration we don't try to put out into the world. You've done all the hard work for us just in this very moment.
You won. You're welcome.
You won. So thank you. We feel so at home. I want to start with just some grounding with the phrases in the title. And I love this part, Cara, because this is when people confess to us, like either the title they wanted for their book, but their publisher made them do this, or actually why they actually won the title battle and they've ended up with a title they really love. So there's 3 phrases: cruel world, terrific kids, terrifying times. can we, without spending the whole podcast talking about those 3 phrases, can we just ground people in kind of what you mean by those phrases?
I mean, in a nutshell, how is the world cruel? Oh my goodness, Scott. I could talk for a whole hour about the choice of the title and the subtitle. We had some disagreements, shall we say, about it.
We've been there. It took us as long to come up with a title and a cover for our book as it did to write the book. Not
that's
joking.
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
But I think it bears stating before you explain the title that the title has an exclamation point, which I think is really, really relevant. Right?
Forgive me. I thought in my dramatic reading of the title, the exclamation point was implied,
yes,
but
it's
clearly
not. Just
not.
Hello, cruel world. It's hello, cruel world. Yes. Okay. Go on.
Thank you for that.
She says with a smile.
Gosh. Yeah. Okay. Where do I go? How do I explain? I mean, we wanted to, with Cruel World, we really wanted to capture and reflect like the angst that parents are feeling right now about like raising kids in this very complex world. Like we did, we were like, should we use complex world? Should we use there was a lot of talk about whether there should be another swear word in the title like there was with my first book. And I did not want that, but my publisher did. And so there was shitty world thrown out there. And I was like, no. Because I didn't want it to be like hopeless,
right.
Like I wanted it to capture like the complexity, but not have it be like, wow, like the world we live in is just like awful. Like we have no hope.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I did try to get profanity into my titles. Clearly you have a different editor than we do because she kept being like, no profanity. Nope. Not funny. That one either. I'm like, okay. Right. So you wanted emphatic but hopeful language that acknowledged the challenge, the tension, and also not leave people in a puddle on the floor.
Yeah. And they definitely wanted it to be like pop culture-y a little bit. So it's like a little bit of a reference to Goodbye, Cruel World. And that was like, there were songs and album titles with that. And like, there's a whole history of like a suicide note that said Goodbye, Cruel World, like ages ago. So it's kind of like a term people sort of know, except flipped because it's Hello, Cruel World.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I'm glad you think it works because it was really a struggle to find something we were happy with. But I will say I loved the terrific and terrifying, like those juxtaposed there, raising terrific kids. Because I do think these are a little bit terrifying these times for a lot of parents. And so that word did seem to capture the reality of the situation without, again, making it feel like we're totally screwed.
And there are books that are terrifying people. And you, like us, are committed to giving people really good science, really good research, and really helpful guidance so it feels a lot less, hopefully a lot less terrifying, if not just a little bit less terrifying. And this book is so beautiful because it's like, hey, we can do this. Like we take this job seriously of raising kids into human beings who have value and respect for this world and for the other people in it. Like, let's start with the quote that I absolutely love, and this will ground the whole conversation, which is, it's important to raise kids who aren't assholes, but how are our kids going to deal with a world full of assholes? And like, that's what we're here for, right? Like we can do what we do in our homes with our values, with consistency and love and intention, and yet we still have to put them out into the world. And I think like that underpinning is a great way to have the conversation. So like in 40 seconds or less, no, I'm just kidding. So if we take this really simple question, as you think about launching us into the conversation about the book and the sort of the framework you've created for answering this question, what is it about a world of assholes? I'm sorry, that's such a disgusting visual for all of us. But what are we arming them with? How are we thinking about it? And maybe your framework of sort of the 3 C's will help people think about like the road, the journey you're taking them on to enter this world full of not so nice people.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like my first book was really like, how do we raise kids who are going to be like good human beings in this world. And then I kind of realized like, wait, but the worlds that they're going to be good human beings in is such a mess. And it's so complicated. And so like, how do we raise these, how do we help our good kids then like handle everything that life is going to throw at them?
Right.
When we don't even know what that is yet. And so it was really like, what skills can we arm them with? And I mean, I get into 10, I go into like deep dives into 10 skills, but I really did want to think about like, I wanted to have some sort of overarching themes. Like, what are these skills? Like, what do they have to do with? And I really came to these 3 C's, which is the first part of the book is like really like coping skills. How, what can we do to raise kids who can cope with all of the crazy things that they're going to have to be dealing with, all of the feelings they're going to have, all of the, challenges and failures and struggles, right? And so it's really about like coping and emotional regulation, that kind of thing. And then the second part of the book is really focused on connection, because we talk a lot about this crisis of connection, especially in boys. But I argue there's like a sort of parallel one that happens in girls where they kind of lose connection with themselves. And we know that having like good relationships is just so important for so many aspects of well-being and for resilience. And so I really wanted a big chunk of the book to focus on, what can we do as parents to help kids build connection and develop the kinds of skills they need to foster strong, healthy relationships. And then the last part is cultivate, which I really think of as kind of like life skills. Like what are the skills our kids need to like engage with the tools of the world, to engage with, which is like money and social media and, other forms of technology. Like what skills can we give them to just sort of like manage the world?
And one thing that's not on your list that I think is important to point out is you have not talked about the importance of pre-professionalizing kids. And you have not talked about the sort of all of the things that happen to create so much downward pressure on kids to know their passions, know they're this, know they're that, and carve some almost artificial path into their adult life, right? And I point this out because all of your buckets, and we'll get into each of them in detail, but all of your buckets are skills that have become slightly secondary in this world of how do we best raise or support kids all the way through childhood and adolescence. And they're not secondary. They are primary. And the stuff that has become a little bit primary, is so obviously actually secondary or tertiary even, right? Unnecessary even. And so really it feels like you're flipping everything on its head, which speaks to the image on your cover, which is a robot that is totally toppled over and sideways. I mean, it's really the through line of what you do is you're shining a light on these very both basic and elevated types of learnings that kids need and therefore their adults need.
Melinda, so given that, right, where we're pushing back on this sort of like the tail wagging the dog of sort of kids and adults feeling like they're on a track and they can't get off of it, when we really want to focus on what are the fundamental skills of being a human being and being in relationship to other human beings, you start the conversation about coping around self-compassion. And I don't know about anybody else on this recording, but like my ability for self-compassion, I would say is like, I'm getting like a B- in self-compassion right now. I mean, it feels like slightly weird to grade oneself on one's self-compassion.
But do you get an A in self-criticism?
I get like an A+ in self-criticism. And yeah, like a B- in self-compassion. I spend probably about 30% of my day thinking about like all the ways I've failed my children. Like that's usually, and then, maybe another 20% of ways I've failed Cara. And, another 30% about, no, I'm joking. But like there is a lot of self-criticism, particularly in the parenting context. talk about why self-compassion is so important and why we want to cultivate it in our kids, because it will actually allow them to cope better, to have better mental health outcomes, all of that stuff. When really, like, sometimes we just want to yell in their faces and like tell them they've completely blown it, or model for them how badly we feel about the ways that we've blown it. Like, really give us the heart of why self-compassion is so critical.
Yeah. So I was really surprised when I dug into the research on self-compassion. Like when I started reporting the book, I had no plans to have self-compassion as a chapter. I was like, maybe I'll mention it somewhere,
Fascinating.
Yeah. I don't know why. Like, I think again, it's not something that we feel is a crucial skill. It feels like a luxury almost, but I was like, you know what? I keep hearing about self-compassion and I'm curious about it because I knew I was not good at it too. And I was like, let's see what the research says. And I started digging in and I was like, oh my God, like there's so much really interesting research and it's so varied. But like, the research suggests that people who are more self-compassionate are, less anxious and less depressed. We know this in teens too. There's like research on teens and self-compassion and, lower depression symptoms. They're more resilient, like more willing to do hard things, more motivated. And then there's like weird stuff that's like they're more likely to seek medical care when they need it. They have stronger relationships, like things that you're like, how does that relate? And we don't really know. Better overall physical health. Like there's just so much that it just looks as though self-compassion. And, some of this research is a little difficult to interpret because some of it is correlational, but it still does look as though everything's pointing in the same direction.
So what does self-compassion look like? Give some examples.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions. So self-compassion is really just compassion directed toward yourself. And it's often thought of in the context of like, if you're going through a hard time, you've made a mistake, you've done something and you feel pretty bad about it. Self-compassion is like recognizing that you're having a hard time, not treating yourself poorly, like, kind of giving yourself some slack, cutting yourself some slack, and recognizing that like everybody makes these kinds of mistakes or everybody finds himself in these kinds of situations. What it's not, because I think there's this idea, and I think especially as parents, when we think about fostering self-compassion in our kids, we worry that it's going to make them lazy. Like it's
soft.
Like it's a form of self-indulgence or self-pity. Like it's like, oh, if you have self-compassion, you don't take any responsibility for your actions. You're like, oh yeah, so what? Like, so what that I, didn't do my homework, like, and got yelled at in school. So it's not absolving yourself of responsibility. It's actually, what the research suggests is that it actually helps people accept responsibility and accept the fact that yes, we are all imperfect, but it also makes us more willing to kind of work on ourselves and grow.
Which makes sense, because if you don't feel the shame about having messed up or made a mistake, you're more willing to own it. It's when you layer the shame of, failure or fallibility that it's like, oh God, I can't admit to it because it's like, it means so much more. But when you're like, oh, this is just a thing I've got to like acknowledge and move past, it's okay. I was just dumbstruck by the tentacles of positive impacts of self-compassion. I was completely blown away by it. And Cara, I'd be curious, like from a medical perspective, why you think it impacts like how people care for their health and their bodies.
Right. I mean, I think of it more, this might be too concrete, but I think of it more as self-compassion being the opposite of self-criticism, right? Two sides of the same coin. And self-criticism takes you down a path of cortisol release, stress response. 20 years ago, I remember having a conversation with my husband so distinctly where I was like, in 20 years, every headline in every newspaper is going to be about how the final common pathway is inflammation. And he was like, that is so true. And here we are. We still talk about it. He's like, you called it 20 years ago. I was like, that's just because I was reading the science and the science has been really clear for a long time. And this is the point, is like, if you look at self-criticism as a dummy for, or one of the paths into the stress response, and you look at the stress response leading to all this, high cortisol levels and chronic inflammation and all the downstream stuff that's associated there, it's very scientific, then it makes good sense to me scientifically why the flip side of that coin, which is forgiveness and self-compassion and sort of insight into why you might have done or said something that didn't turn out to be perfect and why your adrenal gland should not be, immediately producing and excreting massive amounts of these hormones, telling your body, oh my God, heart rate go up, blood pressure go up, all the things, do the thing because I just really messed up. If you don't see the world that way all the time, you're not going down that final common pathway that takes a toll on both the brain and the body. That's like my super science-y version of it.
Well, luckily
Melinda,
we're on with like a best-selling science journalist, so I think we're all safe. I think we're okay.
If I got that wrong, I have self-compassion and I'm okay with it.
So you talk in the book, and this is so fascinating, the evolutionary role of self-criticism, which I was like, every middle school and high school girl needs to understand this because it's literally the script that we use as, I think, as women and as tween and teen girls, which is like, oh, I don't like how I look. Like, I just like, or I think I failed that test. Like we're pinging out into the world, like someone connect to me, someone comfort me, someone reassure me. Like there is a sort of endearing aspect to self-criticism, which many of us have taken on board. And yet it sort of should only be one stepping stone on the way to self-compassion, because that self-criticism is a blockade essentially towards this more important concept, which I find so beautiful, Melinda, this concept of being worthy of love, this concept of self.
Wait. Before we move there, can I just ask a very specific question around what you were just saying, Vanessa? And that is, can you just quickly share that the evolutionary theories around why we self-criticize? Because what you described, Vanessa, you did two examples that are very different kinds of self-criticism. And I'm just curious if we can talk for 1 second about why are we wired to criticize?
Yeah. So one of the theories that I thought was so interesting is that it's really about being accepted into a group. I mean, we're a social species and our survival for the longest time was, we had to be accepted by a group. We had to be protected by others. We had to, travel in groups and whatnot to survive. And so one idea is that self-criticism is kind of like the equivalent of like a dog rolling onto its back and showing its belly to like the alpha dog. It's like basically saying, I am not worthy. I'm not, I'm going to put myself down so that you guys like me better. And so you accept me. And so that I show my reverence to you. And it's like that. It's that kind of response.
It's so like the seventh grade cafeteria table. I mean, it's like, it's so mind blowing how we are like that. It's hardwired in us so that people accept us and include us. And I mean, it's totally, totally fascinating. Again, like I would never have gone down that path. I would never have understood that, Melinda, if you hadn't included that research and that theory, which is like, Cara, in the work we do, I mean, it's such a huge part.
It's massive. It's massive. And so now let's go to where you were going, Vanessa, about self-love.
Oh, self-love. So like all we want, right, is for our kids to love themselves. Like we just want them to love themselves as much as we love them. I mean, also sometimes we hate them a little bit, but like we also really love them. And so I was thinking about like to have a recipe for getting a person to love themselves, like to understand the ingredients to doing that is so fascinating. Can you talk about the importance of that and like, and what the pathway is there?
Yeah. So what the research suggests is that there's like 3 key elements to practicing self-compassion. And so also, and I really want to emphasize that this is like really important for parents to do for themselves, not just for their kids. Because I mean, the first thing that every self-compassion researcher said to me was like, you cannot teach self-compassion to your kids if you do not practice it yourself, because you're modeling it constantly. Like if you're just constantly like criticizing yourself and yelling at yourself and cursing at yourself for the mistakes you make in front of your kids, then like they're going to internalize that is what they're supposed to do too. And so
right, they do as we do, not as we say.
Yeah. So it is really important for us to do this for ourselves too. So the first big thing is essentially like a form of mindfulness, but I know that term can sound scary and and overwhelming sometimes. So it's really like if you're going through something difficult and you're struggling, it's about noticing those feelings in that moment and like basically saying, I'm having a hard time right now. And it sounds so simple and it sounds kind of dumb, but the idea is that if you can distance yourself from the mistake or the circumstances you're in and the rumination you might be and the obsessive thoughts you might be having about how terrible you are because this happened, you can take yourself out of that just briefly and like say, okay, like, and look down at yourself basically and say, okay, like I or this person or whatever you want to say is clearly having a tough time right now. And maybe think, recognizing whatever feeling you're feeling. That little bit of distance can be really, really helpful for like pulling us out of our heads, essentially.
Do you ever feel like sometimes I can feel myself like I'm out of my body and I'm looking down at a situation and I'm just like, oh my God, like either A, I can't believe I'm here, or I can't believe I did that, or I can't believe I'm having this conversation with my kid for the 400th time, whatever it is. And it's like when you're meditating, I'm the worst meditator, by the way. Car's really good at meditating. I'm terrible at meditating. And it's like, all I can do is when I sit there, when I meditate, all I can be like, is like, I'm so bad at meditating. Why am I thinking about all this stuff? Self-criticism. But they tell you, like, I went to this meditation session and she was like, just notice the thoughts that are going through your head. Don't judge them. Expert meditator, Cara.
Good advice.
Yeah. I did start doing that. I started doing that with my kids. I started doing that, with my husband. I started doing that with my family. And I'm like, oh, like notice, don't judge is so helpful. And again, I wouldn't have tied those things together, but it all comes back to the self-criticism, the shame, all of that. With kids, they're not always so willing to share with us that inner monologue.
But isn't it, Melinda, partly because this is all they know? Like we're coping. I'm going to take the sort of unifying phrase of this part of the conversation because we're going to move to connection in a second. We're coping with a world that feels terrifying because we have a different experience of a different type of world, or at least what we believe is a different experience. I mean, the conversation I keep hearing is the world really that different? Or is it that we have a different perspective on it, right? So I do wonder when it comes to these coping skills, whether there's a distinction between what we as the adults need to do in order to cope, because this is a new world to us, versus what kids need to do to cope because this is the only world they have ever known. And I would argue that all of the tools, including self-compassion, are critical for everyone. Yet there's an element that we deal with because we have a basis of comparison. But maybe they don't. Is that is there any date on that? Is there any? Or is that
I love this idea, but I've never thought, I'm just going to be perfectly honest. Like it had not occurred to me to think of it that way. I don't know if there's any research on that. It's really interesting.
It's like why a day feels so long to a kid because like their lifespan is shorter. So a day represents like a bigger portion. All right. So Melinda, that's your next book. You can come back to us on that. But related to that, I want to get to the topic of fragility. Because what the world is telling parents and frankly is telling kids is like, you're too soft, you can't cope, you're sort of like can't handle everyday problems. And like, hello, self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's start there, right? Like you treat a kid like that, they're going to act like that. But are we too overprotective? Like, are we getting in the way of kids developing this? Have we created this like kind of fear-based society where kids, we're scared for them to go be out in the world. They're scared to be out in the world because we're scared for them to be in the world. Like, talk us through what the dynamic is there.
it does look as though there are a lot of elements of how we parent and what we think is good parenting right now that is a little counterproductive ultimately for resilience.
I love how nicely you say that. Like you're like, just like with a little head tilt and like just a very gentle language.
Just a little counterproductive.
Yeah.
Slightly counterproductive. Yes. I mean, and there's so many ways in which this kind of manifests itself, I think, in parenting. I mean, it's like we don't like to see our kids have like negative feelings. We think that's bad and we need to fix it, or we need to, act as if everything's okay, or we don't want them to be uncomfortable in any way. So we, kind of like curate their environments. I remember, I forget who put it that way to me, but I was like, oh, that's exactly what we do. We kind of like curate their environment so that they're always comfortable. And the thing I always come back to with that is like when you send your kid to sleepaway camp and you're so worried about them being homesick that like you're sending them, a care package every day, which, I've sent many care packages myself, but it's like, we don't want our kids to feel uncomfortable and to miss us, but actually like, it's okay. Like that's actually maybe kind of good for them. Right. And so we want to allow them to have these experiences.
Also, they're going to lose whatever you send them or it's going to end up in someone else's bed or
for
cubby.
Sure.
So like save the money and don't send the care package.
Very true. Very true. Very true. And it's also like, because we've been fed all these, scary stranger danger statistics, and we feel like, and we also know that we'll be judged by other parents maybe in our community for like letting our kids do things on their own, like whether it's, walk to school by themselves or, just do things independently. Like there was a Mott Children's survey that was done last year. And it was like some ridiculous statistic that was like 50% of parents wouldn't let their kids go into the next aisle in the grocery store to get something. Like they felt like they couldn't even allow their kids that independence, like one aisle over in the store.
So hot tip to anyone listening, those are exactly the stepping stones of independence we should be doing. Like go pay for the bagels and give me the change. Go grab me the ice cream from the freezer section. Go, we'll walk to school. I'll walk behind you for the first time. And then next time you'll go with a friend. Like these are all the things we must be doing, even though our heart is racing and we're terrified and all of that. Like our kids are never going to leave our houses if we don't help them scaffold those skills. So yes. So we're getting in the way because of worry or because what culture is telling us is good parenting. I think your book is going to change some of the paradigm about
but it's a terrifying world. So like, how do we get over that?
I know. I mean, that's the thing and I keep saying this too, is like, if you are overprotective, it's not really your fault. Like This is what we are being sold. And this is what we are being told over and over again in so many ways. Like we should be scared. We should be terrified. Like the kids are not okay. Their mental health isn't good. So we should make sure they're happy all the time. Like no wonder we're doing this, right?
So that's self-forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there are legitimate reasons that we are doing this. It is not because we are just terrible parents. It's because this is what some people want us to do and want us to feel.
So I think if people read this chapter, they'll get a better sense of kind of like what makes sense and what's actually helpful versus what are we doing because the world is telling us we're supposed to be doing and it's better for our kids and yet it's not. Let's talk about resilience for a second, because we had Tova Klein on and talked a lot about resilience and her new book, Raising Resilience. But I want to take it even further as we think about, okay, we've got coping, we've got self-compassion, we've got sort of recognizing their temptation to treat kids as fragile, but really they've got to get strong. We want them out in the world, loving themselves, being able to handle all the different forces at work. How do we know like when to step in, when not to step in? How do we figure out the balance of like loving and supporting a kid and also helping them build resilience?
Yeah. I mean, it is really, really hard. And like how much independence is too much independence, and where do you cross over into like, this is actually maybe unsafe, or, I'm a fan of like low hanging fruit in terms of like, okay, if I make my kid do something on their own, what's the worst that can happen? What's the chances of like the worst thing happening? And like, how bad is it going to be? And if it's something that they can get through and learn something from and experience natural consequences from, and it's not going to shape the rest of their life, then like let them let them screw it up.
I'll give you a perfect example. I sent my kid, he was probably like 13 at the time, into a sporting goods store to pick up some piece of equipment. I think it's probably shin guards, knowing my family. There's like 8 million shin guards in the world that my children have lost. And a really nice salesperson helped him. And I had given him, I don't know, maybe I gave him $20 and the shin guards were $10. And so he went to the store, he got the shin guards, and he came back and he was like, "Oh my God, Mom, this person was so nice and they really helped me. So I gave him a tip." And I was like, "Oh, bless you." Like, he gave him the other
I didn't think that's where the story was going.
No, I didn't either.
I thought this was going to be the classic story of pocketing the change.
No, I mean, trust me, that's happened many a time. No, he was like, the person was so helpful. I know you tip people. I wanted to show them how much I appreciated their help. So he gave the salesperson the other $10. Like, he gave them the change. And so, to your point, what's the worst that can happen? Would I have liked those $10 back? Yes. Was I proud of my kid for like managing the independence, dealing with the salesperson, getting the change, having the feeling of gratitude for this other person, doing some gesture, which is not like in the context the right gesture, but some gesture to show their gratitude? Great. So like, then we had a conversation like, actually, in those kinds of stores, you don't typically tip people. You can say, "Thank you so much, I so appreciate it." And I know it's confusing because in a restaurant, you would tip someone for good service. So the point is, what was the worst that happened? We lost the $10. I won't tell you about the time my kid charged a much larger amount of money on the Xbox. We can save that for our next conversation, Melinda. But I think going down that path of like, if I let them do this, what's the worst that can happen? By the way, if I let them fail, what is the worst that can happen? And the stakes, the higher stakes, get very scary, particularly, Cara, I don't know if you want to talk about like in this high achievement culture and the stakes we worry about.
Right. I mean, I'll just say, I actually was flashing to a story that has repeated itself many times over in my house, where actually felt like my kids did not adequately value the services that someone was giving them, and they didn't tip or they didn't do the thing that I felt showed that. And I actually had them go back and take the do-over. And but this is a very American phenomenon in terms of how we pay for things, which is a whole other conversation, because around the world, tipping looks different, and how people say thank you and how people express appreciation looks different. But I think your question went down a totally different avenue, which is sort of that anxiety spiral that people get into because of all the expectations that our kids place on themselves and adults place on kids, and how to build resilience through that. Is that the question, Vanessa, in terms of like the physiology of that piece?
Yeah. I mean, Melinda, you have a quote in the book, which is like basically flies in the face of everything we're all doing as parents. And you say, "It's crucial we emphasize the value of doing and experiencing things, even when those things don't result in mastery or medals." And that's like the antithesis of parenting in 2025. And talk about why, like, what is the science? What does the research tell us about why not everybody gets a trophy, right? We're not talking about everybody. It's just like, show up, be there, participate. Why is that so valuable for kids? Why does it not need to be about the best or the winner or whatever it is we are all feeling pressure?
Yeah. Oh, it was so interesting. I interviewed a child psychologist who works in New York City, and she was like, "Here's the thing: when we communicate to kids that they should always be the best and they should always, win the medals or like get the lead or whatever, then they start to think that if they can't ensure that they're going to succeed, they shouldn't even try." Like, and they start. And I have a friend who's a superintendent. the school superintendent, and he was like, I see it when kids are they're not even wanting to like try out for sports teams unless they've been told already that they are talented and that they, if they don't think they can definitely secure a spot, like they don't even want to try, because that feeling of like the only acceptable outcome is success. It means that like you're terrified of failure, right? And you don't want to do anything that could result in failure. And instead, if we normalize failure and we're like, oh yeah, so you didn't get a part, well, that happens sometimes, and maybe next time you will. What could we do to like maybe we could practice your lines more next time. It's also like helping kids recognize like that they have some agency, and maybe there's things that you can do to work on your skills to, increase your chances of success. But like you have to kind of experience that failure first. First of all, to know that failure is okay. You're going to get through it. You're going to survive. And then to think about like, well, what could I do differently maybe next time to get a little bit better? And it's just that process is so important. And I think right now in parenting, like we forget about the process and how important that is. And we just think about the outcome. And when we do that, we're really holding kids back.
Right. And to the subtitle of this book, in terrifying times, you're going to bump up against hurdles, and you've got to build that muscle of managing the discomfort, right? We talk so often on this podcast with so many mental health experts about what mental health really looks like. What does it really mean? It means the ability to appropriately pair the feeling with the situation and then to work through it. It's not happiness. It's feeling the feeling that goes along with the situation and then working your way through it to a point where, if it's a down feeling, where you come up and out of it. And I feel like that's what this speaks to, just in a more macro way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like mistakes are how you learn. I mean, both of your examples that you gave of like, I had my kid do this thing and they kind of messed it up a little bit, like they wouldn't have learred. And then you had this conversation with him, with both of them about like what they could have done, maybe should have done differently. Like that's how they learned that. If you'd done it for them, they never would have learned those lessons, right?
Right. I mean, when I think about like youth sports, for example, which is near and dear to my heart, and you have some examples in the book, and this feeling of like, it's too late. Like I'm in 4th grade and it's too late. Like everybody already knows how to play the sport, or I'm not going to get a good part in the play, so I'm not going to try it. Like all of these examples, it speaks to this, as Cara said earlier, this sort of pre-professionalism and this like expertifying of childhood. And, and part of what that's doing, Melinda, is it's undermining what's so important about the connection that kids need, right? Being part of a team, being part of a community, having unstructured play, navigating the relationships they build by collaborating and communicating, and all of the teamwork required in all these things. And yet we as parents get in the way of it too, because we're like, oh, well, they're not that good, or they don't get the playing time. And we forget that the real value is the human connection, is the trial and error, is the failure, surviving past failure, all of those things. You talk quite personally in the book about your own kind of learning, about pushing through and navigating, kind of not being able to do it all. I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about the sort of work-life balance that you've begun to figure out, and also like how you're putting that into practice with your own kids.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I don't know. I had that like high achieving childhood where I didn't do anything but work like my whole childhood, and just felt like, and I don't totally know exactly where it came from, and I'm not going to blame my parents for it, that they didn't make me do it. I just felt this like need to constantly achieve and constantly like succeed. And then I found like in my, I got to my adulthood and I was like, I don't even know who I am. Like, I don't even know what I like doing. And all I know how to do is like learn, do. Yeah. Like, and like I felt, and I just feel competitive, and like, I was just unhappy. And I had this kind of reckoning with that. And I was like, I need to figure out what I actually like doing and to like model that for my kids, like take time for myself and relax and enjoy myself. And I've really made a lot of changes where like now I also didn't, I just didn't have any hobbies. Like it was just all sorts of, I was a mess. And now I am like, I still obviously have these tendencies, but I joined a choir and I love it. And I will say that my kids sometimes are like, oh, you have choir again? Like, oh, but I'm like, you know what? It's really good for my daughter to see me having a hobby as a mom, right? And taking this time for myself and valuing myself. And, and it means that I have to ask my son. So actually a story that's like related to everything we've talked about. I had choir practice last week when my son he had to leave the next morning at 6:30 in the morning to go to this 3-night or 2-night field trip in the Catskills for school. And I was like, I have choir practice tonight, so I can't help you pack. Here's the packing list. Good luck. I'll see you at 6:30 tomorrow morning and I'm driving you. And I had no idea if he was going to be able to pack everything, what he was going to forget. But I was like, this is the situation where if he screws up, he's going to survive. Like Frost Valley YMCA will not let him die.
Oh, I have fond memories of a trip to Frost Valley. And
it's lovely.
They take good care of the kids. He was in good hands. Yeah.
Yeah. He's gone to summer camp there. So I knew it was fine. But yeah. And then I like went off to camp. And then in the morning we drove and I had no idea whether he remembered everything. And he mostly did, actually. But like valuing yourself also can help teach your kids lessons. So I mean, it's not been like a perfect trajectory to self-discovery and taking care of myself, but I recognize now the value of doing it both for myself and for my kids.
Well, what you described so beautifully is you were on some sort of conveyor belt for whatever reason, and it got you to a place of great accomplishment and achievement, but when you were able to step back, maybe not a place of ultimate happiness. And this is the gift that you are giving people by writing the type of books that you're writing now. You're putting these books out into the world that essentially are giving people permission to take their kids off the conveyor belt. And you're putting it in a much broader context. But I think at the end of the day, really, that's what you're accomplishing. It's like it didn't feel good for any of us, and it doesn't feel good for any of them. The counterpoint, which I would love for you to speak to for a second, is that conveyor belt might get kids to a place of higher ability, or it might get them to a place of, some sort of security with a peer group or with a, something which then ultimately, like you could step back from being on that conveyor belt and recognize what made you unhappy and then go forward. So as we land this conversation, help us to understand in this current world that we're living in, how do we help kids weave together all of these skills, all of these in the big buckets, the coping, the connecting, the cultivating? How do we help them weave them together without being entirely pre-programmed, right? But also with recognizing there are certain things I gotta do. There are certain, like they gotta pack the bag for the trip. They've gotta, there might be a activity that they don't want to do at school that they've got to do. So like, wherein lies that balance? Small question for us to land on.
Like, how in the world am I going to answer this? That is such a good question.
Your head is like, oh, there's more.
That was like a question with like an A, B, C, D, E, and F.
You can take any corner of it, Melinda.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I mean, what I kind of came to realize after writing the book, because it's a book that really like I dug into these 10 skills in these like very detailed ways. And like, I really like getting into the nuances of the research and the little details and stuff. But then I came away from reporting all of it with like, actually, it's really the big picture that matters. You don't have to get everything perfect in your parenting. And actually, I think it's not achievable and it's actually not helpful, but it's like the broad strokes are what matter. It's like the types of conversations you have. Are you communicating your values? Like,
That's
are you communicating your broad priorities? Which for me, like, yeah, I still emphasize like the importance of learning and gaining skills to my kids, but I try not to emphasize like achievement and outcomes and focus on grades. So it's more on like the process of learning and stuff. So it's like, it's really these sort of big picture things that I think matter. And if we can kind of pull ourselves out of the really detail-oriented parental mindset, which is what we're being fed on social media as like, you have to say, you have to have this exact conversation in order to do gentle parenting perfectly, or else you're going to ruin your child for life and they're going to hate themselves.
Too late.
No, not possible either. Yeah. Like it's not about that day-to-day perfection. It's about like, have I had a conversation about my values, or about like what my expectations are around like drugs and alcohol, and like how, it's about how we respond to their struggles and how we interact with them when they're having a hard time, and what we're modeling. It's like these bigger picture things, and there's so much room for quote unquote like mistakes or screw ups or whatever. And actually those are so good for like modeling repair and accountability. So I found it reassuring, because I found that it was like, oh, there's so much flexibility here. And
I mean,
there's so many.
You're speaking to people who live both in the forest and in the trees. And I think that ultimately is right. And we can love listening to the details and getting into the nitty-gritty, which are really important, frankly, because being too global doesn't allow us to integrate people's advice. And so that's where your detail really helps. But that tree sort of perspective at the end, I mean, yes, hallelujah.
And Melinda, I wish I hope your kids see how beautifully you report your work, because in a world where people are ripping off other people's ideas and guidance and science, you have a generosity of spirit in terms of how you report and how professional you are in attribution of the words, deeds, and ideas of your fellow writers, scientists, researchers, all of that. And it's a really interesting thing at a time when people are not doing that, and it's so disappointing, and it feels like they're just adding to the asshole side of the world. I hope your kids know how much you are doing the opposite and really demonstrating a generosity of spirit and a recognition of other people's value and worth in the world. So just the way you've written this book is a modeling for what I hope we teach our kids.
Well, thank you. That is very meaningful. I really appreciate that.
So we hope people will read this. It's like chock full. It's like one of those cookies that has like M&Ms and Reese's Pieces and like butterscotch and like everything in it, because it's so full. And please keep doing the amazing work you're doing and putting wonderful reporting out into the world. We all so appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.